Good morning. Thank you for watching Amir 5858. I am Amir Budnem. I am thankful to all news resources and my team. Following news have been reported by American, European, Canadian, Australian, African, Asian channels and AFP, AP, Reuters news agencies. Now the headlines. Talks are still going on for ceasefire in Gaza, even after UN resolution passed. Hezbollah fired 200 rockets from northern Lebanon to Israel. No casualties reported. U.S. Federal Reserve retained interest rate at same. Americans addicted to drugs and in institutions. U.S. Attorney General in contempt of Congress. New American sanctions on Russia. G7 summit in Rome. Russian fleet near American waters. Port of Baltimore is functional now. UN report accused Hamas and Israel of war crimes. Made in Canada solution for wildfire. France conservative leader's future. French citizen released in Iran. On Wall Street, Dow Jones Industrial down, S&P 500 and Nasdaq increased. Now the news in detail.
Life-threatening flooding. The relentless rain in Florida leads to flash flooding as part of the Sunshine State breaks records, and there's no relief in sight.
Non-stop precipitation, which means more flooding is likely, more daily rainfall records are likely.
Plus intense heat from coast to coast. The CBS Evening News starts now. The threat of catastrophic damage with torrential downpours and rising floodwaters across South Florida. That's where we begin. Good evening, I'm Nora O'Donnell, and thank you for being with us. Tonight, more than 2 million people are under flood warnings and alerts, with streets and entire neighborhoods underwater. In Miami, more than a foot of rain fell in the last 24 hours, and Fort Lauderdale is declaring a state of emergency. They're telling people to stay off the roads. Apartment buildings and homes became their own islands, surrounded by floodwaters. Hundreds of flights across the state are delayed or canceled, stranding passengers. Similar scenes along Florida's Gulf Coast. Emergency crews responding to drivers trapped in their cars. And that area could see more than 2 feet of rain in the days ahead. CBS Miami's Larry Seward is near Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where the rain shut down a section of the interstate.
Relentless storms pounded South Florida today, dumping more than half a foot of rain from coast to coast on the already waterlogged state. Flash flood warnings were issued for parts of Miami-Dade and Broward counties, where rainfall rates of several inches an hour submerged streets and snarled traffic. Massive flooding causing a massive headache on Interstate 95. Officials shutting part of the
On the news hour tonight, negotiations over a ceasefire in Gaza continue as a massive Hezbollah barrage from Lebanon into Israel increases fears about war in the north.
Even as inflation eases, the Fed holds interest rates steady for now, as many costs, including car insurance and repairs, remain high.
All the technology that helps keep us safer on the road also means it costs more to have your vehicle repaired.
And the trial of Hunter Biden highlights the experiences of the millions of Americans struggling with addiction, as well as those in treatment and recovery.
This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the News Hour. Tonight, Israel and Hamas appear to be far from any kind of ceasefire deal. That's despite Hamas's formal response to an Israeli-backed proposal.
Today, the U.S. said that Hamas had requested changes to the three-stage proposal and questioned whether Hamas was negotiating in good faith. Nick Schiffrin continues to follow this all for us. So, Nick, tell us more about what we heard from the U.S. today and what we know about Hamas's response.
On the war, the exchange of fire across the Lebanese border has been so large and so consistent, the chance of an unintended conflict has been very high. And today, in response to an Israeli strike that killed a senior commander, Hezbollah launched one of its largest salvos into northern Israel, sparking fires. Some 60,000 Israelis are displaced from the north, and to understand what life is like for them and in their hometowns, we visited Kiryat Shimona and found a region on edge. In northern Israel.
In the day's other headlines, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives voted this afternoon to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress. The measure passed by a vote of 216 to 207. At issue was Garland's refusal to hand over audio recordings of President Biden's interview with special counsel Robert Hur about his handling of classified documents. Prior to the vote, Republican lawmakers laid out why they wanted the audio.
The audio recordings are necessary to adequately evaluate special counsel Hur's assessment about President Biden's memory and to determine whether the DOJ is engaging in a two-tiered application of justice by refusing to indict Joe Biden.
In response, the Attorney General issued a statement saying, quote, "It is deeply disappointing that this House of Representatives has turned a serious congressional authority into a partisan weapon." The U.S. piled on new sanctions against Russia ahead of tomorrow's start of the G7 summit in Italy. The latest package targets Chinese companies that help Russia's war in Ukraine and institutions who do business with sanctioned Russian firms. More than 300 new sanctions will affect over $100 million in trade between Russia and suppliers of its war effort. At the summit, G7 leaders are also expected to work on turning frozen Russian assets into direct aid for Ukraine. As the U.S. widens its sanctions against Russia, Moscow has dispatched naval vessels to carry out exercises near Cuba. Russian warships sailed into Havana Bay earlier today. They're expected to remain there until next week. A nuclear-powered submarine is part of the fleet, but U.S. officials say the ships carry no nuclear weapons. A State Department spokesperson described such port calls as routine, but added that Russian exercises have ratcheted up because of U.S. support for Ukraine. In Maryland, authorities say that shipping traffic in the port of Baltimore will soon return to normal levels. The channel fully reopened earlier this week, nearly 3 months after the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse halted maritime traffic. Today, with the port as his backdrop, Maryland Governor Wes Moore thanked everyone involved in its reopening.
Many said it would take multiple months for us to get to this point. Some said even up to a year. Well, Maryland, this team did the unimaginable by many. And instead of 11 months, we got this thing done in 11 weeks.
Now officials say they hope to rebuild the bridge, which could come with a price tag of nearly $2 billion. They're aiming to complete the job by the year 2028. The Southern Baptist Convention narrowly rejected a measure today to include in its constitution a ban on churches with women pastors. The proposal fell just short of the two-thirds supermajority needed to pass. The result reverses a preliminary vote last year in favor of the ban. One pastor said, quote, "We have shown the mechanisms we currently have are sufficient to deal with this question. According to the denomination's official doctrine, the office of pastor is already limited to men." The Oklahoma Supreme Court has dismissed a lawsuit from the last known survivors of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. 109-year-old Leslie Benningfield Randall and Viola Fletcher, who's 110, were seeking reparations for the destruction of the once thriving black district known as Black Wall Street. The plaintiffs cited Oklahoma's public nuisance law in arguing that the actions of a white mob in 1921 continue to affect the city today. As many as 300 black Tulsans were killed and thousands of survivors were forced for a time into internment camps overseen by the National Guard. Today, a 9-member court upheld a district judge's decision last year, saying that the plaintiffs' grievances, while legitimate, do not apply to the statute. On Wall Street today, the Dow Jones Industrial Average slipped 35 points to close at 38,712. The Nasdaq jumped 264 points to close at a record for the third straight day. The S&P 500 also ended at a new high. And a passing of note, Basketball Hall of Famer Jerry West has died. A Los Angeles Lakers legend, West was also a literal icon. His silhouette is understood to be the logo of the NBA. West was nicknamed Mr. Clutch during his 14 seasons playing for the Lakers. He was enshrined in the Pro Basketball Hall of Fame twice. As a general manager and team executive, he won 8 championships. West received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2019 and is expected to receive a third posthumous entry into the Hall of Fame for his work as an executive and a consultant. Jerry West was 86 years old. And we have a second passing to tell you about, this one hitting close to home for the PBS team and for the broader Washington journalism community. Longtime Newsweek political correspondent and TV commentator Howard Feynman has died. He was a fixture of the Washington political scene and among the first pundits to transition from print to a new era of broadcast cable news. His family said he died at his home in Washington this week from pancreatic cancer. Howard Feynman was 75 years old.
And those of us lucky enough to have known him know just how much he will be missed. Our NewsHour family is sending his wife, Amy, and his children, Nick and Meredith, our most sincere condolences.
Still to come on the NewsHour, a new book chronicles the plan to overturn Roe v. Wade and the consequences for women and abortion in America. And Judy Woodruff travels to Pennsylvania to sit down with Americans divided over the Israel-Hamas war.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the...
Again here tomorrow night for the latest on Presidents Biden and Zelensky's meeting at the G7 summit in Italy. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Amna Navaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the PBS NewsHour, thanks for spending part of your evening with us.
On this Wednesday night, both Israel and Hamas accused of war crimes. New findings from a UN inquiry with peace talks in a stalemate.
It's frustrating a lot of times.
Russian warships sailed to Cuba, the message it sends, and why Washington says it's not worried. An innovative weapon to fight wildfires.
Yes, you could eat it.
The Made in Canada solution containing no toxic chemicals. And one of Canada's most compelling maritime mysteries finally solved.
We found the quest.
Hooray! The discovery of Sir Ernest Shackleton's last ship.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Chris Galis.
Good evening. Thanks very much for joining us. More allegations tonight of war crimes against both Israel and Hamas. An inquiry commissioned by the United Nations finds both sides committed.
Findings do not come with a punishment, but they could be used in the active international court cases relating to the war. Chris?
Redmond Shannon in London, thank you. Well, despite hope for peace, there was a major attack on Israel from inside Lebanon today. Israel says it intercepted hundreds of rockets fired hours after Israeli airstrikes killed a Hezbollah militant commander. Hezbollah is vowing to increase its operations against Israel. The conflict in the Middle East is expected to be addressed at the G7 summit in Italy. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has arrived in the country. He is there along with other leaders from the world's most developed countries. Mackenzie Gray is traveling with the Prime Minister and looks at what else is on the agenda.
The final preparations coming together in Italy for the G7, where 2 wars are set to dominate the agenda.
In the days ahead, we are going to continue to push
priorities for next year, Chris, when Canada hosts the G7.
Mackenzie Gray in Bari, Italy. Thanks, Mackenzie. French President Emmanuel Macron is defending his decision to call a snap election after his party's crushing defeat in the European parliamentary vote. In his first public address since the surprise move, he said he couldn't ignore France's new political reality. He urged all politicians to regroup and defeat the far right in upcoming elections. He said he would not resign if his party loses. And France is suspending controversial voting reforms in New Caledonia. The planned changes triggered deadly civil unrest, and at least 9 people were killed. The reforms would have extended the right to vote to residents who have lived in the territory for at least 10 years. A Russian missile strike in southern Ukraine has killed at least 9 people and injured nearly 30 others. Ukrainian officials say Russian forces launched aerial attacks in 6 regions of the country today, with the hardest hit being President Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown of Kryvyi Rih. They say Ukraine's Air Force shot down more than 24 missiles and drones. The latest attacks come as residents deal with rolling blackouts of up to 8 hours. Ukraine is grappling with severe damage to its power stations due to earlier bombardments. Russia's military is also making headlines in the Caribbean. A fleet of naval warships arrived in Cuba today for what's being described as a diplomatic 5-day visit. At one point in history, this would have been considered a major provocation. But as Jackson Prosco reports, Washington doesn't consider the move a threat to the U.S.
It's not the first time Russia's Navy has sailed to Havana. At this tense moment between Moscow and the West, Russian warships and a nuclear submarine on America's doorstep send an unmistakable message.
The visiting Russian warships to Cuba are Vladimir Putin's way of reminding President Biden that Moscow can challenge Washington in its own sphere of influence, too.
The ships arrived after days of high-precision missile training in the Atlantic. Russia's defense ministry says the vessels are not carrying nuclear weapons, but are loaded with hypersonic missiles. All of it coincides with a visit by Cuba's foreign minister to Moscow.
We will see how this unfolds in the coming days, but we have seen this kind of thing before, and we expect to see this kind of thing again.
The U.S. insists the Russian visit to Cuba is routine and does not represent an escalation.
An explicit threat to the peace and security of all the Americas.
A far cry from the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, which entrenched fears of a Soviet attack launched from the island. These days, Cuba is more interested in an economic lifeline, and is even trying to woo Russian tourists.
Russia is the only country that has been willing to provide significant help, just as it did during the Soviet era.
Russia isn't the only country looking to win heart, a sign this tiny nation still plays a major role at a time of global instability. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
An update tonight on the investigation into a deadly wrong-way pursuit on a busy Ontario highway. The chase in April ended in a deadly crash that killed 4 people, including a baby and his grandparents. Police have been criticized for pursuing the suspect, and now the province's police watchdog says 2 of the officers involved have not agreed to be interviewed. Sean O'Shea reports.
This was a collision on Highway 401 east of Toronto in Whitby on April 29th, the aftermath of a high-speed chase that took 4 lives and left 2 others seriously injured. It began with a call about a possible. The SIU has 120 days after a police-involved incident to conduct an investigation.
They have to decide whether there's reasonable grounds to lay criminal charges against any of the officers who are involved.
So far, no charges have been laid. Sean O'Shea, Global News, Toronto.
Fire suppression with a special ingredient. Coming up, the new non-toxic solution to douse wildfires. Summer arrives officially next week, and it's already been an active wildfire season in some parts of the country. With more than 15 million hectares burned last year, a Canadian company has come up with what it believes is a better non-toxic solution to douse the flames. And as Jeff Semple shows us, it's practically edible.
Here we go again. After last year's worst wildfire season on record. Fire crews are bracing for another fight, but this time they have a new weapon. This water is mixed with a product called EcoGel, a made-in-Ontario innovation that essentially fights fires with salad.
100% plant-based, so it's made with common food ingredients, which you probably eat most of our ingredients over the course of a week.
This veteran volunteer firefighter who founded the company says most of their ingredients are grown on Canadian farms. That vegetable oil is then mixed with gums, starches, and water that could change the way we fight fires. Jeff Semple, Global News, Portland, Ontario.
In the U.S., parts of Florida are underwater tonight after a torrential rainstorm brought record-breaking downpours in the southern part of the state. For the second straight day, more than 10 centimeters of rain fell in just a few hours, triggering flash floods in several municipalities. The relentless rain creates dangerous conditions on roads, even stranding some drivers. Hundreds of flight delays and cancellations have also been reported. Flood threats and scattered storms are expected to last throughout the week and into the weekend. The loss of the logo. Ahead, how superstar Jerry West became an NBA legend on and off the court. The sporting world lost a legend today. 3-time Basketball Hall of Famer Jerry West has died. As a player, West was a 14-time All-Star, an NBA champion, and it's his image that's the silhouette for the league's logo. Yet, he might have been even more legendary in the front office. West won 8 championships as an executive for the LA Lakers and Golden State Warriors, helping build multiple dynasties along the way. Jerry West was 86 years old. A warning tonight for lovers of spicy food. Denmark has recalled 3 instant noodle products over concerns they could poison consumers. The recall is for 3 flavors: Samyang Buldak Hot Chicken Ramen 3 times spicy, Buldak Hot Chicken Ramen 2 times spicy, and Hot Chicken Stew. At least 2 of those flavors are sold in Canada. Danish authorities say the issue is the level of capsaicin, a spicy, naturally occurring chemical found in chili peppers. The noodles are believed to have a Scoville rating, the scale used to measure spiciness, of around 13,000. For context, the popular hot sauce Sriracha clocks in around 2,200. And some big news from the world of competitive eating. Its most famous champion will not be part of its most famous event this year. Major League Eating, yes, that's a thing, has announced Joey Chestnut is banned from the annual Nathan's Famous Hot Dog Eating Contest. The 16-time winner recently agreed to represent Impossible Foods, a vegan company that's a competitor of Nathan's. Chestnut says he's gutted about the decision. The league says he can compete in future contests if he ditches his sponsorship deal. No longer lost at sea. Next, how explorers found Ernest Shackleton's last ship off Canada's Atlantic coast. 53 years after a plane carrying 5 men disappeared in the U.S., searchers believe they found the wreckage. It was discovered by underwater experts in Vermont's Lake Champlain, close to where the private jet was last tracked before it vanished in 1971. The team used sonar imaging to confirm the plane's custom paint matched the long-lost jet. Victims' families say they finally have closure.
We always knew the reality, but now the reality is here, and it's difficult, and it's very sad.
The plane went missing on a snowy night shortly after takeoff. 17 separate attempts to find it failed. A major maritime mystery has been solved in Canada. The last ship used by legendary polar explorer Sir Ernest Shackleton has been found off the coast of Labrador more than 60 years after it sank. Finding the vessel Quest has long been a dream for a team of modern-day explorers determined to find the vessel's final resting place. Heidi Petracek breaks down how they did it and what this means for Shackleton's legacy.
That's it. Are you serious? That's what I thought.
This is the moment. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Chris Galis. Tonight's Your Canada, fittingly, icebergs off the coast of St. Anthony, Newfoundland, and Labrador. Thanks very much for watching. Have a great evening.
Breaking news tonight, the life-threatening flood emergency in South Florida as we come on the air. Breaking news tonight, the life-threatening flood emergency in South Florida as we come on the air. The tropical rain drenching the region, triggering dangerous flash floods. Parts of I-95 shut down. Roads are submerged, vehicles stranded. Dozens of rescues reported. Some areas getting a month's worth of rain in a matter of hours. A possible tornado touching down, cutting off a community. We're in the storm zone. Also tonight, the new twist in the deadly hijacking of a transit bus in Atlanta. The suspect, by chance, speaking to TV cameras hours before the chaos. What he said about his struggles with mental health. The mass casualty incident in Illinois. 3 sheriff's deputies shot as they entered a home with a barricade suspect. President Biden in Italy for the G7 summit. The new security agreement he's expected to sign with Ukraine as Russian warships reach Cuban waters 90 miles off the U.S. coast. House Republicans voting to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress. But will it go any further than that?
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening and welcome.
This news is funded by viewers like you. Please support our work at democracynow.org/give. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad have submitted a formal response to a United Nations ceasefire proposal for the Gaza Strip. A Hamas spokesperson said the group's priority is to bring a complete stop to Israel's assault on Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has yet to respond publicly to the U.S.-backed ceasefire. A new report by a UN independent human rights body finds both Israel and Palestinian armed groups have committed war crimes since Hamas's surprise attack on October 7th. The damning UN report accuses Israel of using starvation as a method of warfare, forcible transfer, and intentionally directing attacks against civilians. It calls on Israeli leaders to immediately end attacks resulting in the killing and maiming of civilians in Gaza, end the siege, implement a ceasefire, and to pay reparations. The report also calls for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages held by Hamas. On Tuesday, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin congratulated Israel's military chief 2 years ago. In Washington, D.C., peace activists with Code Pink disrupted a public address Tuesday by National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. He was speaking at the American Jewish Committee's Global Forum in Washington, D.C.
Jake, thank you for being here with us today. We know...
Jake Sullivan, you are a war criminal. 15,000 people, 15,000 kids dead is not self-defense. Jake Sullivan, you are a war criminal. Jake Sullivan...
Code Pink activists Olivia Danucci and Medea Benjamin were quickly removed from the venue. Their protest came a day after officers with the Federal Protective Service fired a salvo of pepperball rounds to clear demonstrators who'd erected a tent encampment outside a San Francisco federal building to protest U.S. support for Israel's assault on Gaza. Elsewhere yesterday, President Joe Biden was interrupted by a protester who accused him of being complicit in genocide.
The main reason I'm here is to say, I mean this from the bottom of my heart. No.
President Biden was speaking at a Washington, D.C. conference hosted by Everytown for Gun Safety. As the protester was led away, the crowd chanted 4 more years.
Folks, it's okay. Look, they care. Innocent children have been lost. They make a full point.
The protest during President Biden's remarks on gun violence came just hours after a jury in Wilmington, Delaware found his son, Hunter Biden, guilty of 3 felony charges for illegally purchasing a gun at a time when he was using drugs. Hunter Biden becomes the first child of a sitting U.S. president to be found guilty of a crime. Special counsel David Weiss spoke after the verdict.
This case was about the illegal choices defendant made while in the...
Biden could avoid jail entirely. In the Gulf of Aden, at least 49 people have drowned and 140 others are missing after a boat carrying African asylum seekers sank off the coast of Yemen. At least 6 children are among the dead. The refugees have been fleeing violence, poverty, and the impacts of climate change in the Horn of Africa. The UN's International Organization for Migration reports nearly 100,000 asylum seekers arrived in Yemen last year, many of them bound for Saudi Arabia and other wealthier nations. That's more than triple the number who made the perilous crossing just 2 years prior. Malawi's vice president and 9 members of his entourage have been confirmed dead after their plane crashed in a mountainous region of the southern African nation. Saulos Chilima had served as Malawi's vice president since 2020, was expected to challenge incumbent president Lazarus Chakwera in elections scheduled for next year. The Biden administration's lifted a ban on arms shipments to the Ukrainian military unit known as the Azov Brigade, a former militia with ties to far-right hate groups. The State Department said Tuesday a thorough review turned up no evidence the brigade's members have committed human rights abuses. The Azov Brigade was founded in 2014 by a self-avowed neo-Nazi and white supremacist. Meanwhile, delegates from 90 nations are set to gather in Switzerland this weekend for a Ukraine peace summit, though Russia and key nations, including China, will not be participating. Swiss President Viola Amherd on Monday outlined the summit's goals.
We want to discuss ways for comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine based on international law and the UN Charter. We want to develop a common understanding for a possible framework to reach this goal, and we want to decide on a schedule together, how both parties can be tied into a future peace process.
The pharmaceutical giant Johnson & Johnson has agreed to pay $700 million to settle lawsuits brought by more than 40 state attorneys general over its asbestos-laced talcum powder, which has been linked to cancer. As part of the settlement, J&J will permanently end the production, sale, and marketing of all products containing talcum powder. In 2018, a Reuters investigation found the pharmaceutical giant knew as early as 1971 that some of its talcum powder contained dangerous levels of asbestos, but covered up its findings about the deadly carcinogen. And a federal judge in Tallahassee has struck down Florida's ban on gender-affirming care for minors, ruling the law unconstitutional. U.S. District Judge Robert Hinkle also struck down a provision that erects barriers to adults seeking transition care. In a 105-page order handed down Tuesday, the judge writes, quote, "In time, discrimination against transgender individuals will diminish, just as racism and misogyny have diminished." To paraphrase a civil rights advocate from an earlier time, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice, he wrote. The legislation was signed by Republican Governor Ron DeSantis last year. DeSantis has promised to appeal the ruling. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Warren.
For the first time, we are hearing from one of the Saanich police officers shot outside of a bank of Montreal branch nearly 2 years ago. The constable was inside an emergency response team van that was peppered with gunfire from twin brothers who staged a robbery to lure police and kill them. CTV's Shannon Patterson has his harrowing story of survival and recovery.
Getting back in uniform was a big motivator for Saanich Police Constable Stephen Reichert.
I spent the majority of 10 months in a wheelchair. For now, I'm now just focused on getting back to what I can be and what my new normal is.
Reichert was shot in both legs and took another bullet to the arm 2 years ago during what was initially thought to be an armed robbery at this Bank of Montreal branch.
The information that we had was that the 2 suspects were inside. We had a number of civilians. So around that time of our arrival, the call was classified as a hostage taking.
Reichert and 6 other officers inside an emergency response team van arrived on scene just seconds before the 2 armed suspects exited the bank.
One of the suspects to the rear immediately turns towards us, and as he turns, he raises up his rifle. Suddenly I felt a heavy impact in my left leg. That caused me to look down to my leg, and it was in that exact moment that I received another very heavy blow to my right leg.
He realized he'd been shot, and so had 5 of his fellow officers inside the van.
I'm now laying on my back in a pool of blood, and to my left is one of my colleagues. I can tell that he's been critically injured. He's not able to communicate with me. We're staring face to face with each other, and immediately I knew that we were under fire.
Hearing the patrol supervisor say over the air that shots were fired and there were officers down. At that point in time froze for me for a few seconds.
As Reichert pulled out his tourniquet to try to stop the bleeding, the only ERT member who hadn't been shot exited the van.
He was engaging with the suspects, and that was a very huge moment for me, just feeling that he was taking a huge risk at essentially putting himself in a position to be able to provide myself cover and protection.
The suspects, twin brothers Matthew and Isaac Octorloni, were shot and killed by police. It was later determined the robbery was just a ruse.
This bank robbery had a bigger motive to it, and that was to kill police officers, plain and simple.
The 6 officers who were hit by gunfire all survived, but Reichert's legs were torn apart by the bullets.
The round essentially vaporized about a 4-inch piece of my tibia bone.
Recovery has been long and difficult, but the constable has returned to work part-time.
At this point, that's working 2 days a week, putting the uniform back on, which is honestly just another huge step in that recovery. It's another huge milestone for me.
Despite his injuries and the trauma he suffered that day,
I call this incident a success because we were able to achieve our ultimate goal, which was securing the hostages and protecting the innocent people.
Shannon Patterson, CTV News.
Baltimore. See no so long as he. All right. Shoot it next up to Christmas. And Jones, Shingang,
Okay, it's time to play What's He Saying?
Welcome to What's He Saying. It's a fun new game where we try to make sense of Biden's inane gibberish. I'll play a short clip from a Juneteenth event, and each guest will have to guess what the hell he just said. Roll it.
They're all ghosts in new garments trying to take us back. Well, there are. Taking away your freedoms, making it harder for black people to vote. Or have your vote counted. Closing doors of opportunity. Attacking the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You can believe it, banning books about black experience in America. Trying to erase and rewrite history.
All right.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm going to go to you first, Aaron. I kind of get the gist, but what just happened there?
I definitely heard something regarding ghosts and garments and possibly taking us back. So I think he's hallucinating in public because I don't know what else would be happening involving ghosts and garments.
All right. Jeff, did you notice something like his mouth decided to leave his body?
Yeah. This guy has trouble with words. Sure.
Yes.
I believe he was saying that goats are somehow black people, and they're taking it back for equity and diversity. Did I win?
I don't know. I have no idea. Let's play it one more time for Pat and Tyrus. Then we'll go to discussion.
They're all ghosts in new garments trying to take us back. Well, there are. Taking away your freedoms, making it harder for black people to vote. Or have your vote counted. Closing doors of opportunity. Attacking the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You can believe it, banning books about black experience in America. Trying to erase and rewrite history.
So, Tyrus, he's talking about a group of very
He's talking about me, okay? And that was the most racist I've ever heard in my life. He called us ghosts. He said we're kicking in doors and taking away everyone's opportunities. He said we need to go back on the boat. Did you not hear the same I'm hearing?
Stealing books?
We steal books. We don't know what computers are. This is the most ridiculous. It was horrible.
Wait, I'm trying to figure out who he was talking. I mean, I'm assuming he's talking about Republicans.
The one time he was in the right place. He came up saying it's Juneteenth. Good chance. 97% of the audience is black. Yeah. And this was a good time for him to tell it how it is. And apparently, we're stealing everyone's opportunities, and we need to go back on the boat.
You don't understand that? The speech right there?
He just told America to ghost the blacks. Ghost us.
I don't know. All right, Kat, you've heard it twice now.
I just thought he said like Republicans have a lot of new clothes and don't like black people.
No, black people stole the government's clothes.
The ghosts have the garments. Well, I thought ghosts maybe white people.
Yeah,
okay.
Who have new clothes.
Has happened to you. You've been ghosted a few times.
Oh yeah. Aggressive.
Here's my question. Okay, we have a come to Jesus moment here where this guy cannot run for president. When is he dropping out, Aaron? He has to drop out.
I don't think he will.
How can you?
And also things have moved on. But also, this guy has wanted to be president since the 80s.
But he's already president.
The only way Joe Biden leaves office is if he loses or like if he passes away. He is going to be on the ballot in November. Ballot access would be a huge issue, like all the complications that go with that. But even if he has like weird mouth twitches in that clip or like the guy very clearly has struggle speaking, he is going to be the Democratic nominee.
I just don't see that.
Yeah.
Oh, I 100%.
He was coded. He's clever. You gotta watch him. Sneaky. Gibberish, black. Gibberish, don't touch him. Gibberish, they need to get out of here. Gibberish, boat. Genius.
I'm going back to my theory that he's like a mafia don. He's pretending to be mentally ill, but then behind the scenes, sharp as a tack.
Because he beat the rap. Yeah, he beat the rap. Maybe President Trump should have been like, what day is it?
All right, I'm coming to this. All right, Kat, let me ask you this.
Mama.
Have we come to the conclusion that we don't need a president when an invalid is in charge? So clearly somebody else is in charge here.
The defining moment for me really was the oil cancer.
Yeah.
Like when he got out there and he said, I have cancer from oil on my mom's windshield. And then we moved on the next day like he didn't say that.
Yeah.
I mean, like if the president says, I have cancer, and then we just like are like, he didn't. And then like his press team's like, oh, he just said he's been affected by cancer. No, he didn't say that. After I saw that and everyone just like moved on going about their day like that didn't happen. Well, of course, if he can do whatever, he can do that 9 million times over and everyone's just going to move on like it didn't happen.
Everybody here in their head is kind of okay with him being the nominee. There's a chance he could win. But I swear to God, if he was the airline pilot and you were boarding that plane, you would all get You would.
No.
Why are you okay with this?
No, I wouldn't want him to be my cashier at McDonald's.
Yes.
Okay, I'd be like, I'm never getting my order.
Walmart greeter. Missing handshakes in front of my. Oh, come on, man.
It's so true. It's like we have to put him in perspective. You wouldn't let him walk your dog.
Well, who won? What's he saying or not? Did I win? Did Tyrus win? Who won?
I think Tyrus won.
All right.
Because he's black.
The president's kicking me out. When's my boat coming?
Hey, Sean Hannity.
Tonight, several breaking stories as we come on the air. The flash flood emergency in Florida at this hour. A wall of water coming down after 20 inches of rain. The damaging winds and tornado warning, and now the extreme heat moving into the east. Also, just 100 miles off Florida, Russian warships, including a nuclear submarine. And here in the U.S., the deadly bus hijacking. We now know what happened inside that bus. First tonight, the torrential rain emergency in Florida. Miami to Fort Lauderdale to Sarasota. Underwater tonight. Dangerous driving. Part of I-95 shut down. Destructive winds bringing trees down and that tornado warning. And the rest of the east set to get hit with potentially record high temperatures. Tonight, the 2 American tourists electrocuted in a jacuzzi at a resort in Mexico. One is dead, the other injured. The dramatic video tonight authorities are now studying. In Atlanta tonight, inside that deadly bus hijacking, the man who was killed and what happened on that bus, speeding through 2 counties. You'll hear the emergency calls, passengers trapped on the bus. Off Florida tonight, the Russian warships steaming into Havana Bay, including a nuclear-powered submarine. Tonight, the U.S. tracking this with a show of force, the first time in 16 years. Arthur Raddatz with late reporting. Tonight, a major escalation on Israel's northern border. The Iranian-backed Hezbollah
launching more than 200 rockets in just a matter of hours. Meanwhile, back in the U.S. tonight, authorities describing a chilling anti-Semitic scene on the New York City subway. Protesters asking, quote, Zionists to raise their hands and get off the train. Others defacing the home of a museum director who is Jewish. Aaron Kotursky with what the mayor is saying tonight. And tonight here, we celebrate Mr. Clutch, a true basketball icon, Hall of Famer, Jerry West.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York.
Malawi will accord a state funeral to its vice president who was confirmed dead in a plane crash on Tuesday. President Lazarus Chakwera has announced 21 days of national mourning, during which flags will fly at half-mast across the southern African country. No date has been set for Saulos Chilima's burial. An army plane carrying him and 8 other people was declared missing on Monday before its wreckage was found in a forested area in the country's north. Chilima was serving his second term as Malawi's vice president.
It's very sad to hear this story, especially to the nation, considering the fact that Dr. Chilima has done a lot of things here in Malawi. Being a vice president, he assisted a lot of people, even the current government. I'm so sure without Chilima, we could have been ended in another elections.
51-year-old Chilima was the head of the United Transformation Movement Party, which is in an alliance with the president's party. A ministerial committee has been put in place to oversee preparations for his funeral.
More than 40 people have died in a fire that swept through this residential building, housing workers in Kuwait's southern Mangaf district. And dozens of residents were injured in the blaze, which broke out early on Wednesday morning. Officials say initial reports suggest the fire was linked to code violations. Local media is reporting that the country's interior minister has ordered the arrest of the building's owner. The authorities are currently combing the area for evidence. We're still confirming the death toll. There are a lot of casualties. Unfortunately, it's more than 40. Some injured people have been taken to hospital and are in ICU. We cannot give a number until we have the final report and turn it over to the investigation unit and the judicial department. Most of the deaths are believed to be as a result of smoke inhalation while residents were sleeping. It's been reported that many of the people living in the building were migrant workers. 1 year after he came to power, Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu says his economic reforms will continue despite increasing hardships. During his televised Democracy Day speech on Wednesday, he acknowledged the economic difficulties facing the nation, but said Nigeria's economy had been in desperate need of reform for decades. With the country facing its worst cost of living crisis in years, the public is angry about changes made by his administration. These include the removing of a petrol subsidy that kept prices artificially low and the devaluation of the currency, which sent inflation soaring to over 33% in April. Tinubu says the reforms are intended to create a stronger, better foundation for future growth in Nigeria and offer everyone access to economic opportunity and fair pay. As part of this, he announced plans to set a new minimum wage, saying that as his administration continues to reform the economy, he will always listen to the people.
These performers from the Gaza Free Soccer Center are offering some colorful entertainment and acrobatic performances as a tour shelter centers in central and southern Gaza with the mission of healing their hearts. Their aim is to alleviate the children of Gaza from the stress associated with ongoing war. We aim through the events and activities we offer in light of the situation we are living in the Gaza Strip to alleviate children and treat post-traumatic stress disorder and to get them out of the current atmosphere and give them joy and a smile on their faces, even if it is small. In light of the pain, bombing and destruction that we live in, we try to introduce an atmosphere of joy to them through these activities. Dozens of Palestinian children gather to watch, even if only for a short time, to get away from the tragic reality they have been living in since the beginning of the war. Some could not hide their joy. We were sitting in the tent and had songs. We came and found there were games and clowns. I brought my siblings too and we had a great time. We hope that these events will be repeated after the negative events we went through during this war. One of the friendly clown performers painted his face wearing a bright colored costume and sprays a little joy in his acrobatic movements. The group has been able to help reduce the mental anguish endured by these children. Through this activity, we aim to convey an image of peace to children and relieve them of the pressures they experience during their displacement in the Gaza Strip. We aim to make children forget the forms of destruction and blood spilled in the Gaza Strip through these games. The Gaza Free Soccer Center was established back in 2018 and previously put on weekly performances while training some 250 Palestinian children in the art of soccer skills.
The heartbreaking storylines are always so personal.
I have never gone to confession before.
Today's the day.
Oh, gosh.
There's no reason to be nervous.
We are queens.
The Art of, Tuesday 9:30 on ABC and ABC iView.
Today, Hamas denies US claims that it wants significant changes to a UN-backed Gaza ceasefire plan.
Hamas has proposed numerous changes to the proposal that is on the table. Some of the changes are workable, some are not.
South Australia to introduce a sweeping ban on all political donations, with huge fines and jail time for those that don't comply. The latest unemployment figures to be released. We'll bring you those later this hour. And Ariane Titmus smashes the 200-metre freestyle world record as Australia's Paris Olympics campaign takes shape. Hello and welcome to Mornings. I'm Catherine Robinson. Taking a look at the weather in the capital cities first off. Sunny with a top of 21 degrees in Brisbane. Sydney and Canberra will be partly cloudy. Cloudy in Melbourne, 13 degrees. It'll be partly cloudy in Hobart. Rain increasing for Adelaide, mostly sunny in Perth, and morning smoke haze then sunny for Darwin. Well, uncertainty surrounds the fate of a ceasefire proposal to end the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, as the fallout from Israel's Vice President Joe Biden includes a phased release of Israeli hostages in Gaza in exchange for Palestinian.
Where, in the light of day, the evidence will be put forward and these accusations of war crimes will play out for a long time to come.
John Lyons there. The South Australian government has unveiled plans to ban political donations and is calling on state, territory and federal governments to follow suit. Reporter Bethany Alderson has more.
Well, this proposed legislation is proposing to ban South Australian members of parliament for a month of public consultation, and the government says it's hopeful they'll be in effect ahead of the next state election in 2026.
Bethany Alderson there. Well, heavy menstrual bleeding affects 1 in 4 women who have periods. Despite the pain and disruption it causes, only half seek help. For those that do, many end up having a hysterectomy, surgery to remove the uterus. New data shows Australia's unusually high rates of hysterectomy are coming down, but some women are still struggling to access less invasive alternatives. Joining me now in the studio to discuss this is Associate Professor Liz Miles, who's with the Australian Commission on Safety and Quality in Healthcare. Good morning, Liz. Thanks for joining me.
Good morning, Kat.
If we can just start out, I thought it was interesting to hear periods are not, they don't actually know that that's not normal. So what does a heavy period look like?
So I think the formal definition is that, you're every hour and a half, sometimes it's bleeding for 8 days or more, passing clots, experiencing fatigue. But I think, for most women, it's actually about the impact on their lives.
Yeah.
And, we know that women modify their social activity. Some women, really be about what clothes they choose. Some people have to take off work, experiencing pelvic pain. And really it can have a very big impact on someone's life for, quite an extended period of time.
And that's pain and some social aspects there that you just mentioned, but also there are other health ramifications of bleeding heavily.
Well, certainly we know that 60% of women with heavy menstrual bleeding are actually iron deficient. And iron deficiency is something that we can treat very easily.
No need to suffer in silence.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
That's a pleasure, Kath. Thank you.
Well, the Victorian government says a new system for teaching children how to read will be life-changing for students. From next year, all students from prep to grade 2 will learn to read using phonics, which focuses on the relationship between sounds and letters. Reporter Michael Lorrigan has more from Melbourne.
Well, this is a significant announcement, as you just said off the top there. All students will learn this new approach, a blanket approach across all government schools from next year. And essentially, they'll be taught to read using the synthetic phonics approach. And they'll be given a minimum of 25 minutes daily explicit discussion today, in the coming weeks and in the coming years, about the best way to teach children to read.
Michael Lorrigan there. Education expert Tricia Jay says structured phonics is one of the most effective ways to develop reading fluency in children.
Phonics in this case refers to teaching students to read using the letters that are on the page and learning the phonemes, whether their parents, speak English very well at home or not. And I think that's really important.
A warning now, this next story includes the name and image of an Indigenous person who has died. 2 men are due to face court today, charged over the murder of 25-year-old Jai Gray in the Glasshouse Mountains area of Queensland. Antonia O'Flaherty has the details.
Well, Queensland police have described the alleged murder of 25-year-old man Jai Gray as a callous and senseless act. Police allege that they found his remains. They're both set to appear at Caboolture Magistrates Court this morning.
Well, Ariane Titmus has broken the women's 200-metre freestyle world record at the Australian Olympic and Paralympic swimming trials in Brisbane. ABC Sports' Amanda Shalala reports.
Titmus came into the race as the Olympic champion, but her challenger, Molly O'Callaghan, was the world record holder.
Titmus 200-metre multi-class individual medley. The federal government has announced further measures to crack down on international students who do so-called visa hopping to extend their stay in the country. Political reporter Evelyn Manfield has more from Parliament House.
Potentially tens of thousands of people. The government says that there's actually been a rise in the number of international students who are staying in the country on successive student visas. So they say in 2022-23, that number grew by around 30% to more than 150,000 people. So the government wants to crack down on this. So from the 1st of July, people who are in Australia on a visitor visa won't be able to apply for a student visa. The government says in roughly the last year, there are around 36,000 people who did apply for that student visa while on a visitor one. There will also be changes from the 1st of July to temporary graduate visa holders. The government says around a third of people who are getting towards the end of their temporary graduate visa, as that's expiring, they're then applying to study again. Requirements on that one as well, but as we know, the government is also proposing a cap on international students in universities as well.
Well, to news just in, Australia's headline unemployment rate has fallen to 4% in May, down 0.1 percentage point from April. Employment rose by 40,000 people in May, and the number of officially unemployed people declined by 9,000, which helped the unemployment rate to decline slightly. We'll have more shortly in finance with reporter Nadia Daly. Well, extreme erosion has forced the demolition of an $800,000 marine rescue building in Western Australia. Our reporter Piper Duffy joins us now from the demolition site at Geraldton. Hi there, Piper. Why is the building being knocked down?
Kath, even though the two-storey Geraldton Marine Rescue Building shed at the local SES precinct to store additional equipment.
OK, Piper Duffy there. Thank you so much. A new survey has found Australian workers are working 1 day a week for free due to unpaid overtime. Unions New South Wales surveyed 5,000 workers across multiple industries and found that the vast majority of workers are working unpaid overtime each week as part of their job. The average worker is doing 9 hours of unpaid work in a week, and that adds up to around 11 weeks a year of unpaid labour with a financial value of around $21,000 a year. 70% of respondents reported working overtime on weekends, with almost half saying they worked on more than 2 weekends every month. Meanwhile, the majority of people surveyed felt that refusing unpaid overtime would limit their career growth. Almost 80% agreed that their unpaid overtime had a negative impact on their life outside work. We spoke to some workers earlier. Here's what they had to say.
The organisation I work with, it happens all the time. No longer do you check in and check out. It might be 9 to 5, but it's
7 US cents. And that's all the finance news for now. We'll certainly be following that news on the jobless rate later.
Nadia, thank you. Well, police are appealing for information into the suspicious death of a high-profile surfer on Sydney's northern beaches earlier this year. Officers were called to a unit complex in Manly in February, where they found Guy Hames with serious head injuries. The 59-year-old was treated on the scene and taken to hospital, but died several weeks later. Police say Mr Hames was known as Creature and was...
Our whole family needs closure.
French President Emmanuel Macron has suspended planned electoral reforms that triggered deadly protests in New Caledonia last month. France had planned to extend the right to vote in provincial elections to French residents who've lived in the Pacific Territory for at least a decade. That sparked protests from the indigenous Kanak population. A ninth death has been linked to the unrest, with a 34-year-old man dying from injuries sustained in a confrontation in late May. New Caledonia's President, Louis Mapo, expressed his condolences, saying it was a deeply regrettable situation for the country. According to the French High Commission in New Caledonia, more than 1,000 people have been arrested in relation to the riots, with more than 200 police officers injured. Mr Macron says the reforms must be suspended to ensure the return to order in New Caledonia.
I have decided to suspend the New Caledonia Bill because we cannot have ambiguity during this period. It must be suspended to give full force to the dialogue taking place over there and for the return to order.
The move comes days after the French president's shock decision to dissolve French Parliament and call a snap election, after his party lost heavily to the far right at the European parliamentary elections. Pro-independence movements in New Caledonia say the voting reform bill and have called on the community to begin restoring peace and rebuilding social ties. US officials say they're monitoring a group of Russian naval vessels that have arrived in Cuba in what's widely seen as a show of force. The vessels are anchored at Havana Bay, ahead of planned military exercises in the Caribbean. The timing of the visit comes as tensions rise between the Kremlin and Washington over the war in Ukraine. Foreign ministries from Cuba and Russia have also met in Moscow and reaffirmed their long-standing alliance.
We are grateful to our Cuban friends for their principled position on the situation around Ukraine. From the very beginning, Havana assessed the ongoing events, outlining absolutely correct and true reasons for what had begun and what the West had been preparing for many years.
We convey our firm support to Russia in the face of politicisation and isolation policy of the West, including its pernicious actions in international organisations.
The vessels are just 145 kilometres from the US state of Florida. The fleet includes a nuclear-powered submarine. However, Cuba insists there are no nuclear weapons on board. US officials say they're keeping an eye on the movements.
We have seen these Russian naval deployments sailing into Cuba in the Bush administration, the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and now the Biden administration. It's something we watch closely and carefully.
9 people have been killed and at least 29 others injured following a Russian ballistic missile attack on the hometown of the Ukrainian president. Ukraine's military says an administrative building and apartment block in the city of Kryvyi Rih were damaged in the attack. President Volodymyr Zelensky says it proves Ukraine and its partners need to strengthen air defences. The attack comes ahead of a global peace summit in Switzerland this weekend. Russia has not been invited. Well, shipwreck hunters say they've discovered the wreckage of a vessel on which renowned polar explorer Ernest Shackleton made his final voyage. Quest was found on the seafloor by a team of scientists using sonar off the coast of Canada. They say the vessel is the last connection to the fearless age of Antarctic exploration.
Setting sail for Sir Ernest Shackleton's final expedition. The ship, called Quest, leaving London for Antarctica.
Easing tomorrow with 18, Perth sunny and 20, and Darwin another sunny day for you tomorrow with 31 degrees.
Thanks, Em. And a reminder, you can keep up to date on all the latest news across all your devices at news.abc.net.au and, of course, on ABC iView. Thanks for your company this morning. I'm Catherine Robinson. Recapping our breaking news this hour, Australia's seasonally adjusted unemployment rate fell to 4% in May, down 0.1 of a percentage point from April. Do stay with us for the latest on that and our other top stories on the ABC News channel and, of course, ABC iView. And I look forward to your company tomorrow. Bye-bye.
24.com.
Senior figures from the centre-right Republicans Party here in France vote to oust their leader less than 3 weeks from the snap elections, balking at Eric Ciotti's moves to team up with the far-right National Rally. Lebanon's Hezbollah militants fire hundreds of rockets into northern Israel in retaliation for the killing of a senior military figure in an airstrike. And sending a signal to Russia of American resolve in supporting Ukraine, Presidents Biden and Zelensky are to sign a bilateral agreement on security as they attend the G7 summit in Italy. Welcome to the France 24 newsroom in Paris. I'm Alexander Alcott. Now, the French Republicans Party, which has long been in the top two alongside the Socialists, is now a shadow of its former self. It finished a lowly fifth in the recent European Parliament elections domestically, and now its leader has been voted out for seeking an alliance with the rising far-right. He, though, refuses to leave. For more details on this, we were earlier joined by our reporter Jean-Amir Jamin from outside the Republicans' headquarters.
This was the scene of all the drama on Wednesday for Les Républicains, the right-wing party of France, as Eric Ciotti closed the doors on all of the workers here, citing security reasons, but many saying that it came as a result of the backlash following his announcement on Tuesday that he would like the party to align itself with the national rally of Marine Le Pen, going into those parliamentary elections for France in less than 3 weeks' time, those snap elections called at the drop of a hat by Emmanuel Macron. So the deputies, the high-ranking deputies of the Republicans, they met about 150 meters away from here at the Social Museum, where they voted unanimously to expel Ciotti as party leader. Ciotti made a response soon after, saying that the meeting was illegal and he could take action. And that was reiterated in an interview later, where he still claims to be party president. Now, a question for Les Républicains is where they should align themselves going into those elections. They fared very badly, Renaissance Party, but all the questions will have to wait. First, they have to get their house in order and see what the response of Eric Ciotti is after his ousting.
As Jean-Amir Jamin reporting. Next, on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Italy this Thursday, the US and Ukrainian presidents are set to sign a bilateral security agreement in what the White House said was a signal to Russia of American resolve in supporting Kyiv. Monty Francis has the story.
As U.S. President Joe Biden headed back to Europe just days after returning from D-Day commemorations last week, on board Air Force One, his national security advisor made some news, telling reporters that at the G7 summit Thursday, Biden would sign a security agreement with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
Our goal here is straightforward. We want to demonstrate that the U.S. supports the people of Ukraine, that we stand with them, and that we'll continue to help address their security needs, not just tomorrow, but out into the future.
The G7 in Italy comes with up shipments of microchips and technology that are being used by Russia on the battlefield.
Next, the Iran-aligned Lebanese militant group Hezbollah has fired hundreds of rockets into northern Israel hours after an airstrike killed a senior commander. The Israeli military said 215 projectiles were intercepted, while others ignited bushfires. So far, no casualties have been reported.
The burnt roads of the far north of Israel. Last week, rockets from Lebanon sparked fires here. Hundreds of hectares went up in Hezbollah fighters, but also around 100 Lebanese civilians. 15 Israeli soldiers and 11 civilians have also been killed.
A new UN report by an independent commission investigating the October the 7th attacks and the war in Gaza has accused Israel and Hamas of committing war crimes. The report is not legally binding, but could potentially aid the International Court of Justice as it seeks to get certain leaders of both sides arrested, this including the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Inga Oyatade has more.
Israel and Hamas have both committed war crimes. That's the conclusion from a United Nations Commission report investigating the 7th of October attack. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is among those accused.
President Emmanuel Macron has announced the release of a French citizen by Iran. Louis Arnaud, a banking consultant in his 30s, was one of 4 French citizens arrested in 2022 and sentenced to 5 years in prison in November. Macron says he'll now be back in France later this Thursday. Several storage tanks containing crude oil have ignited at a refinery in Iraq. Firefighters are now working to control the massive blaze on the outskirts of Erbil, a city in the semi-autonomous Kurdish region in the north. No casualties reported there, as the area has been evacuated. Finally, some sport. And the UEFA Euros 2024 are due to kick off in Germany this Friday. As well as solidifying itself as a hospitable travel destination, the country is also eyeing a boost in tourism revenue from the championship, with 3 million fans due to arrive across the 10 host cities.
With the Euros just around the corner, the country is gearing up for a summer of football mania. Here in Frankfurt, souvenir shops are restocking their black-red gold.
Sunshine is our best bartender.
The German Retail Federation estimates a whopping €3.8 billion in additional sales during the tournament.
Stay tuned for more news on France 24.
This is Asia First.
Thursday morning, I'm Julie Yu. It's 9 a.m. here in Singapore. The headlines this hour. China vows countermeasures after the European Union clamps down on electric vehicle imports. The bloc will impose new tariffs of up to 38% on top of the current 10% starting next month, citing unfair competition and overcapacity. Beijing dubs the measures political and protectionist.
I'm Arnold Gay. The Biden administration also taking aim at Chinese entities drawing links to the war in Ukraine. The U.S. announcing a new wave of sanctions targeting firms in Russia and Hong Kong. As well, Moscow calls the move aggressive while Beijing maintains it's committed to peace talks. Plus, an elusive ceasefire. Top American diplomat Anthony Blinken says the changes Hamas once made to a Gaza truce plan are not workable. As the conflict drags on, a UN inquiry finds both warring sides guilty of grave violations of international law in the early stages of fighting.
And I'm Elizabeth Neal with your business news. The Fed signals it won't take its foot off the brake yet.
We do not expect it will be appropriate to reduce the target range for the federal funds rate until we have gained greater confidence that inflation is moving sustainably toward 2%.
Jerome Powell projects one rate cut this year and more in the next, acknowledging modest progress in the U.S. central bank's fight against inflation, even as price pressures loom over November's presidential election. But first, the European Union has announced new tariffs threatening to impose them on imports of Chinese electric vehicles.
Depending on support from member states, the tariffs could apply provisionally next month and definitively in November.
This follows a probe into Chinese state subsidies that are blamed for a surge of cheaper EVs. China is pushing back against the planned tariffs, calling it typical protectionism. It's urging the EU to seriously reconsider the move, saying the bloc should stop going further in the wrong direction.
The Foreign and Commerce Ministries warned the new tariffs will ultimately harm Europe's own interests.
保护主义没有前途，开放合作才是正道。我们敦促欧方恪守支持自由贸易、反对保护主义的承诺。And in the background, the famine gets worse every day.
We take a break for business news next with Liz Neo. Inflation falling, but the Fed once again counseling patience.
Yeah, that's right. And that is despite a change in the inflation trend, with the Fed saying that it's getting too late in the year to pull off the trio of rate cuts they had expected as recently as March. But the central bank appears to have come through without upsetting markets. Asian stocks are tracking the U.S. peers higher. We will keep you on top of the trading action.
A prestigious competition. Going into my first Olympics, my mindset would be mainly to focus on my match and to gain exposure and experience at a different stage. I will definitely do my best to fight for every point.
And that's Asia First for today. Thank you very much for your company.
Join us again for more tomorrow, and don't forget to check out our headlines anytime at CNA.Asia and CNA 938 Radio.
Also, we're on Facebook, YouTube, and X.
Good evening, I'm Amin Navaz.
And I'm Jeff.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.